Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of Unit 6. This is going to be over Chapter 16, which is Economic Interdependence. The essential question for this chapter is how has growing economic interdependence changed spatial relationships among people in the world? So again, this unit as a whole is really all about industrialization and development. And so by the end of the unit, you need to understand that the Industrial Revolution, as it diffused from its hearth in Great Britain, facilitated improvements in standards of living. Measures of development are used to understand patterns of social and economic differences at a variety of scales. Development is a process that varies across space and time. And sustainable development is a strategy to address resource depletion and environmental degradation. At the end of this section, you'll be able to analyze the causes and consequences of international trade and growing interdependence in the world economy. Complementary and comparative advantage establish the basis for trade. International trade and trading blocs like the European Union and NAFTA have become more important as a result of globalization. Geographies of interdependence in the world economy include global finance crisis, the shift in manufacturing to newly industrialized countries, imbalances in consumption patterns, and the roles of women in the labor force. This first section, we're going to talk about complementary and comparative advantage, international trade and trading blocs, manufacturing in those newly industrialized countries, consumption patterns, and the impact of global finance crisis. The internet and worldwide TV coverage have increased what people can easily know about the resources and products available for trade in other regions. This, combined with improved transportation, has caused international trade to increase significantly. So make sure you guys understand this complementary versus comparative advantage. Trade occurs when one party desires a good or service that it does not have or cannot produce as efficiently as someone else can, and another party has a desired good or service and is willing to part with it. Trade sometimes occurs through a barter, which is a system of exchange in which no money changes hands. This is most common between individuals. For example, in the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, the main character, a lawyer, provides legal services to a poor farmer in exchange for bags of food. So it wasn't actual money that was being exchanged. However, trade usually occurs with the exchange of money or credits. Parties tend to trade goods or services in which each has a comparative advantage in producing. For example, climate and soil give farmers in Florida an advantage over farmers in Maine in growing oranges, but Maine farmers have an advantage in growing potatoes. Trade between parties is even more attractive when complementary exists, when both parties have goods or services that the other party desires. Sometimes complementary does not exist, and the trade is heavily weighted in one direction. For example, the United States wants far more products made in China than China wants products made in the United States. This can create tension. In particular, the country with the trade deficit might see the relationship as favoring the other side. Globalization has resulted in increased international trade. Larger and faster ships, improvements to major canals such as the Panama and Suez canals, new port facilities capable of handling larger ships, an increase in air cargo all made the transport of goods faster and less expensive. In the United States, trade increased from 5% of the total economy in 1960 to 13% in 2015. In China, over this period, it went from 4% to 22%. Because of the increasing importance of trade, countries have strengthened their relationships with their most important trading partners. This has resulted in the formation of trading blocs, groups of countries that agree to a common set of trade rules. One of these is the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, which took effect in 1994. Now, under President Trump's administration, he did renegotiate NAFTA and renamed it, but it is essentially the same trading bloc and same agreement. It's now called the UMCA, which stands for United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. These agreements encourage and ease trade restrictions. The creation of the European Union has also allowed for the easy movement of goods among member states. Members of these supranational organizations have much greater access to each other's markets. Not only can goods move more easily between the member countries, but people, services, and capital can also usually move more easily among the member states than they could prior to the agreements. One aspect of globalization that has been that companies have moved industrial production from highly developed countries to developing countries. The speed of phone and internet communication means that decision makers of transnational corporations can easily maintain contact with the management of new processing plants in the developing world. The ease of transportation results in frequent travel between the head offices and the factories in the newly industrialized countries. The manufactured goods can also be easily shipped to markets in developed countries and the rest of the world because of increase in transportation infrastructure. As countries become more prosperous, citizens consume goods and services increase rapidly. Many of the consumers in these countries have a high level of disposable income and consequently purchase a great deal. Most residents of developing countries do not have the same level of disposable income and thus purchase only necessities. One of the wealthiest countries on earth, the United States, consumes 1/5 of all of the resources, although it includes only about 1/20th of all the people. Maps and charts of consumption show the overwhelming significance of the developed world. While the spatial pattern of consumption is strongly skewed towards the developed world, the environmental impact of the consumption is spread more broadly. Many natural resources used to manufacture goods are extracted and processed in the developing world, and then consumed in the developed world. As a result, problems with mining and manufacturing plague poor countries, but problems with use are more often found in wealthy countries. Not only do citizens of developed countries consume many more resources on a daily basis than do citizens of developing countries, they also live considerably longer. As a result, over a person's lifetime, the imbalance in resource use is even larger than it seems at first glance. For example, at current rates of consumption, in its lifetime, a baby born in the United States will consume more than 200 times the energy resources as will a baby born in Bangladesh. The impact of the global financial crisis. Increased interdependency links the economies of countries for better or worse. Growth in one country can result in new economic opportunities in other countries. For example, as China has gotten wealthier, it has purchased more grains and meat from US farmers. But an economic downturn in one country can lead to economic challenges elsewhere. When the price of oil dropped in mid 2014, consumers everywhere enjoyed lower gas prices, and manufacturers could produce goods at lower costs. However, economies in all oil-producing regions suffered. The effects were far-reaching and often acutely damaging. Oil companies lost revenue. Worldwide, about 250,000 workers lost their jobs. Governments in oil-dependent countries like Venezuela lost tax revenue, forcing them to lay off public employees and reduce services, which was part of the kind of collapse of Venezuela's economy. Coal companies that could not compete with lower cost oil reduction reduced production, leading them to lay off workers. Energy industry investors saw significant losses as well. By the end of this next section, you'll be able to explain how economic restructuring and deindustrialization are transforming the contemporary economic landscape. Outsourcing and economic restructuring have led to a decline in jobs in manufacturing regions and to the relocation of a significant segment of the workforce to other areas. In countries outside of the core, the diffusion of industry has resulted in the emergence of the International Division of Labor and manufacturing zones. Such zones are things like maquiladoras, special economic zones, and free trade zones. The contemporary economic landscape has been transformed by the emergence of service sectors, high technology industries, and growth poles, places like Silicon Valley and the Research Triangle in the US. Government initiatives at all scales may help promote economic development. So in this next section, we're going to talk about outsourcing and economic restructuring, transnationals and export processing zones, and ethics and societal changes. Over the past several decades, automation has reduced the need for labor in manufacturing industries. At the same time, the spatial distribution of manufacturing is shifting. At the global scale, many companies have moved manufacturing plants from highly developed countries such as the US to less developed countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam. At the regional scale, factories in the US have moved from the Northeast and Midwest to the Southeast and Southwest, which you guys saw last week when you watched America Revealed Made in the US. As part of globalization, transnational corporations, companies that operate in more than one country, have shifted manufacturing jobs away from the highly developed countries to the less developed countries in order to increase profits. Corporations desire to pay lower wages, and a recognition that firms they can compete with will also be attempting to pay lower wages is an important factor. As a result, there is a constant downward pressure on wages. Workers always face the possibility of losing their jobs to automation or to lower wage workers in another country. While workers may suffer from lower wages, consumers can benefit. When companies produce goods at lower cost, some of the savings might be passed along to consumers in the form of lower prices. Comparatively, guys, today's clothing is much cheaper than it has ever been in human history. You can go to stores like H&M and Walmart and Zara and these kinds of places and buy extremely cheap clothes. And the only reason you're able to do that is because the people making those clothes are being paid very, very, very little in countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam. Companies may also save money by taking advantage of weaker laws protecting worker safety and the environment in newly industrialized countries. And they may receive government incentives such as tax breaks to relocate there. However, transportation costs are likely to increase because the main markets for manufactured products usually remain in wealthier countries. Globalization has created a new international division of labor, which is a system of employment in the various economic sectors spread throughout the world. Core countries such as the United States and Germany have rapidly increasing quaternary sectors that emphasize research and development. Middle-income countries such as China, Mexico, and Indonesia usually manufacture goods that are developed in the highly developed countries. So you have a lot of people working in the secondary sector. The least developed countries have a larger primary sector and may export minerals and resources used in the production process. Weak laws also affect non-industrial sectors. The Cayman Islands in the Caribbean made itself a global center for investment industry through its low taxes and lax regulation of business. Other countries profit greatly through trade in illegal things like cocaine, heroin, and other drugs, like Colombia. Many governments in the developing world offer incentives to attract manufacturing jobs. One common technique used in over 100 countries is the creation of export processing zones, EPZs. These are physical spaces within a country where special regulations benefit foreign-controlled business. These zones are known by different names in different countries. They're called maquiladoras in Mexico. Most of them are located right along the border with the US. Free zones in the Dominican Republic, and special economic zones in China. They are often situated near international airports, seaports, or land borders from where the products can be easily exported. One incentive that countries use in EPZs is tax breaks. Transnationals typically do not pay taxes on the machinery and raw materials they import into an EPZ as long as these items are used to make products for export. This regulation protects existing businesses that cater to the local market. For example, if a resident entrepreneur employs 20 people producing t-shirts to sell locally, the new t-shirt factory in the EPZ will not drive the resident owner out of business with cheaper products. The country hopes that existing jobs in the locally owned factory will remain in addition to the jobs added in the foreign-owned factory. So for example, maquiladoras in Mexico are only producing things that are made for sale in the United States. So an American company like Fry, which makes really expensive leather boots and things like that, they closed down their factory in the United States. They opened it up right across the border into Mexico. They make all of their Fry products in Mexico for much cheaper because they can pay the Mexican workers a lot less, but they can only sell those materials back into the United States. So people disagree about whether EPZs are ethical. Critics charge that with the transnationals are taking advantage of the workers and paying them a fraction of what they would pay workers in their home countries. Proponents of EPZs believe that the wages are reasonable for the region and thousands of people, mainly women, have access to paid employment at better wages than would otherwise be available to them. In addition, low wages keep the cost of items manufactured low, which allows lower income people to purchase them. EPZs and the employment of women in general can make significant changes on the status of women in their society. As women earn wages, they become less dependent on men. As a result, women find that their concerns are more likely to be heard by their partners and governments. In addition, birth rates decline as more women gain employment. In this next section, we're going to talk about the fate of brownfields, corporate parks and campuses, technopoles, and government development initiatives. As the types of economic activities that exist in a region evolve, so does the economic landscape. Many wealthier countries now have a post-industrial economy, one that no longer employs large numbers of people in factories. Most people are providing services and processing information, like here in the United States. The shift from an industrial to a post-industrial economy changes the landscape of a country. The stereotyped image of a post-industrial landscape is one of deteriorating buildings surrounded by weeds, marked by broken or boarded up windows and rusting metal. These sites of abandoned factories are known as brownfields because of the rusting metal, and the region of the United States that was hit hardest by deindustrialization was the Northeast and the lands around the Great Lakes, which is all together called the Rust Belt. It's called that because of deindustrialization. In reality, old buildings are usually torn down, so brownfields many times are just empty lots. However, if the factory building remains structurally solid, an entrepreneur might renovate it for a new use and keep enough of its exterior so that people know the building's history. People have converted old factories into apartments, restaurants, recreational facilities, and artisan boutiques. In central Iowa, Grinnell College now has many of its offices in a building that was once manufactured gloves. If the factories have been torn down, the land cleared of debris and pollution, the land might be converted to a new use, such as a park, a housing development, or a shopping mall. If no memorial indicates the former use of the land, newcomers to the area might not realize the site was used for a factory. In most communities that have experienced factory closures, the effective landscape includes far more than the former industrial site. Unless the community successfully replaces the lost manufacturing jobs, much of the community may show signs of decline. Because many people will have moved away from the area seeking employment, and many of those who stayed remain unemployed or have much lower paying jobs. There are often many abandoned stores and homes, and as tax revenues shrink, public buildings and parks might also show signs of neglect. It's not just the existence, removal, and repurposing of old factories that typifies a post-industrial landscape. New jobs that are created also help to shape the post-industrial landscape. As a result of this growth, office buildings and other commercial spaces are more likely to be evident in the landscape. Increasingly, these office building congregates in corporate parks or business parks. Some very large corporations create their own corporate parks where they are the only tenant. Samsung has its headquarters, known as Samsung Digital City, in a park 13 miles south of Seoul, South Korea. The campus covers an area equal to about 40 city blocks. About 35,000 people work there, and it includes 135 buildings, of which 4 are large office towers. Other facilities include research laboratories, gymnasiums, swimming pools, medical offices, a heliport, daycare facilities, and housing for guests and visiting employees. Just as agglomeration economies can encourage the spatial grouping of manufacturing plants, the same principle can apply to technology companies. A technopole is a hub for information-based industry and high-tech manufacturing. It allows for benefits such as the possible sharing of certain services and attracting highly skilled workers to an area. Often these technopoles are located near universities well known for their computer, mathematics, engineering, science, and entrepreneurial business facilities. Silicon Valley is really the most famous technopole, and Silicon Valley originated where it did because of its relationship in proximity to Stanford University. So it's near Stanford, it's near the University of California, Berkeley, and it's perhaps, again, the most famous. Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, have acted as a catalyst for the development of the Route 128 high technology corridor near Boston. The Research Triangle in North Carolina developed because of the 3 major universities, Duke, North Carolina State, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. A smaller scale technopole, the Technology Triangle near the University of Waterloo and in Canada, has become a very important economic stimulus to much of southern Ontario. Economic growth because of the economic stimulus associated with technopoles. They can be called growth poles or growth centers. The concentration of high-value economic development in the growth pole attracts even more economic development. Desired side effects happen with this. Economic planners promoting a growth pole policy hope it will have spin-off benefits, positive outcomes in the addition to the main outcome. Spin-off outcomes can help communities far beyond the growth pole itself. For example, farmers 100 miles away from the pole should have expanded markets in which to sell their produce, resulting in increased sales and profits. There's also unwanted side effects. The possible downside of growth poles are the backwash effects. One of these is the loss of the highly educated young people from distant communities as they migrate to the growth pole for employment. As a result, the distant communities might suffer depopulation, loss of tax revenue, and the closure of various services. These changes can be detrimental for a community. Because of the desire for economic growth and development, governments at all levels provide various incentives to encourage the expansion of existing economic activities or the creation of new ones. Depending upon the nature of the economic development and what level of government is supporting the development, the type of incentive may vary. In most cases, the government must achieve certain targets, such as providing a certain number of full-time jobs. Throughout most of U.S. history, government efforts to promote economic growth have been controversial. In the 19th century, the debate over the proper role of government reflected strong regional differences. Compared to the states in the South, states in New England and the Midwest supported more active government. At a national scale, New England and the Midwest supported high tariffs to fund government construction of roads, canals, and harbors and to subsidize construction of railroads. At the local scale, citizens of New England and the Midwest supported higher taxes to pay for local transportation products and, most importantly, public schools. While here in the South, those kinds of taxes are often met with a lot of resistance from the general population. So here is a chart comparing these corporate parks versus industrial parks. So just take a second and look at the similarities and differences. Finally, here is a chart showing the government efforts to promote economic growth. So the different things that governments can do to try to encourage economic growth. All right, what you're going to do now this week is I want you guys to watch another video. It's going to be all about what we've seen here in terms of deindustrialization. Called Left Behind America. It really focuses on the Rust Belt. So please watch that. Thank you.